Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about some books that have come out recently and other ones that I'm looking forward to that are coming out soon, particularly ones that are related to where we are now, which is Pride Month, although technically Pride Month is just finished, but there we go. And this is sort of partly inspired by a comment that Jacqueline left asking about kind of upcoming books, particularly LGBTQIA plus ones. But equally, I've kind of been thinking about this a little bit anyway. I mean, my reading tends to probably skew a little bit more LGBTQ than average, I guess, just by dint of being a gay man, being someone involved in the community, and being someone for whom those sort of books are particularly interesting. But equally, there have been so many good books coming out recently that have been... It's kind of almost an embarrassment of riches, actually, of just how many incredible books have been coming out that talk about various parts of the community, talk about various things, and sometimes they're just other weird and wonderful books that are kind of written by people within the community. And as I record this, as sort of a few days after London Pride, which was an amazing experience, I remember, I keep on realising increasingly that pre-pandemic Bob was not great with crowds. Post-pandemic Bob is not like any better, in fact probably worse. So that's been interesting, but yeah, kind of got me thinking about what books have I either read recently or that I'm looking forward to that are either by LGBTQIA plus authors or have kind of specific themes around some of those things. So let's get started. This is going to be a bit of a list of some books that I've read and really enjoyed, and some books that are coming soon that I'm really excited for. So let's get started. So starting first with a couple of books that I've really enjoyed recently that have come out at some point this year. Let's start off with Lamya H with Hijab Butch Blues, if I'm not tripping over my own words there. And this was a really interesting memoir, I thought, of just sort of looking at various sort of intersections of identity. And so a young queer Muslim woman working out how those things intersect for her. And I thought this book was so powerful in so many ways, not only because it has this real strength of force in how it sort of propels forward and how we sort of look at the main character, well, how we look at her kind of talking about her life, but equally just the ways that this book has such an open-hearted approach. It's not trying to, you know, I think there's often a way when we talk about how various identities intersect, where those books present them as an either or and a sort of oppositional forces kind of thing that kind of come together. And I think what's really warm-hearted and generous about this book is that it doesn't present those two things as being opposite ends of anything. In fact, it sort of just looks like how do those two things marry together really interestingly? You know, what sorts of ways do we speak about identity that have a lot of overlap? And you know, I just thought it was a really interesting book for that. Next, we had The Late Americans by Brandon Taylor, which has recently come out, at least in the UK. And as much as I didn't really get along with Brandon Taylor's last book, I found The Late Americans really interesting for the way it sort of examines a set of characters. There is a level of snark and of kind of sarcasm that runs through the book, but I thought there were some really interesting things in here about how characters talk about their identity and their notions of who they are, and how those again have these interesting things when they rub up against other things. So when characters try to excuse their behavior because of certain identities, or when characters are presenting themselves in a way, in one way, and then not identifying that more generally. I'm being vague here mostly because I don't want to spoil anything in the book, but I think that this book does some really interesting things in how it kind of captures this group of characters, particularly in a specific time. And so it almost has, you know, there's, and I hate comparing books in this sense, but you know, the way A Little Life focused on a set of characters and sort of the world going on around them, I feel like The Late Americans does something really interesting with that kind of thing, in a way that A Little Life, I think, never always fully managed to achieve. I think these characters feel a little bit more fleshed out, and so I think that's really quite interesting. And I think it's a very strong, sort of bold book in the way it kind of has this very strong voice that sort of pushes throughout the book as well. Two books that were kind of quite confusing and interesting in equal measure that I found really interesting. So the first being Open Throat by Henry Hoke. And this is a book where a queer mountain lion is sort of wandering around and sort of generally interacting with people. It's a very short book. I'm not entirely sure if I understood what happened in the book itself. It was quite weird. It was good fun, I think, nonetheless. I think I kind of got to the end and was like, okay, cool. I don't know what's happened here. But in many ways, I think that's kind of also part of the point. It's sort of full of this real absurdity. There's this mountain lion that's at one point having a sort of full-on, almost semi-normal conversation, it seems, with somebody, with a human. It's very strange. It's very weird. And I think this is the thing I'm really enjoying at the moment, is being able to have so many exciting bits of queer writing where they're not just sort of having to write about themselves and write about identity fully. It can be just a wild romp of something going into another little universe. So that's something I've really, really enjoyed from this as well. The other weird and wonderful one is Isabel Waidner with Corey Fada, Social Mobility. And, you know, having a non-binary character at the heart of this, who's a literary prize winner, does mean obviously there are massive links to Isabel themselves and their life. And it's, again, like with Open Throat, what is going on in this book? Who knows? But it's kind of wonderful how it just is something utterly bizarre. It is sort of some kind of commentary on literary prizes and institutions. It has a lot of Bambi references throughout. It is incredibly short and punchy and lives in its own little world, and I kind of love that about it. At the same time, I have no idea what I actually read, but I'm excited for it nonetheless. So I might reread this just to try and grasp what on earth happened there, but I'm really, really excited for what I did read, what I did understand, rather, about the book. So there we go. That's another little gem to add to this little cluster. And finally, before I go on to some other books that I haven't read yet, one book that I got a very nice advance copy of and has now actually come out is Paul Burston's We Can Be Heroes. So Paul Burston is a writer and was also the creator, or is also the creator of the Polari Prize and the Polari Salon. And so long-time subscribers may know that I've been following the Polari Prize for the last few years, and I've really loved getting new recommendations through that as well. So this is Paul Burston talking about his life and what a life it has been so far. I mean, he talks really candidly about sort of early days of activism and sort of his writing career, both as a sort of as an author, but also as a journalist and doing various other bits. And he's just had this incredibly rich life that's told in such a beautiful way in this book as well. So I also do urge you to pick it up. I think he writes really candidly about just that, those early days of the times of activism and sort of being there at really some of these critical points in the turning tides of LGBTQ history in the UK. So it's been really fascinating to read this and kind of get a little more of an insight into who he is as well. And he talks about the salon and the prize and everything else in this as well. But really interesting to kind of get an insight into his life. And now on to a few books that I'm really looking forward to reading. So I don't have as much information necessarily about these because I haven't read them. But here are some little books here that I'm really, really excited to try and read at some point this year. The first of which being Richard Millward with Man-Eating Typewriter, which is a little bit of a hefty one. But the thing that I'm really, really excited about with this, and was the reason why within seconds of realizing what this book was about, just bought it automatically and was like, I'm having this. This book is partly written, or at least it sort of is very heavily influenced in parts by Polari, the sort of lost, sort of former, not even lost, the sort of code language that was used by many particularly queer men, but by other groups as well, in sort of 50s, 60s and 70s. There's a lot more to say about Polari as a thing. It's a fascinating language and sort of form of speech. Parts of it have made its way into modern day English in kind of quite a strange way. But essentially it was a a way of hiding in plain sight, of sort of using language to be able to talk about things quite candidly and openly in an environment that might have been quite hostile. So I'm really, really keen to read a book that is written in Polari, and I think this will kind of blow my mind. And I kind of hope that it like just gets a bit of love this year. I mean, I say this without having read it. Maybe I'll hate it. I'm sure I'll love it. But what an interesting experiment to do, to try and write a book in Polari and kind of reclaim it as a sort of as a literary language, as well as a sort of spoken code as well. Another book that I read recently and really adored was Harry Nicholas with A Trans Man Walks into a Gay Bar. And I think this memoir is just stunning in several ways. But the core idea is this is Harry talking about his experiences as a man who is both trans and gay, and how sometimes the kind of the ways that you interact with people in sort of queer spaces can be really affected by some of those things, right? So, for example, hearing misogyny from gay men in queer spaces, and that feeling like a really alienating experience for him as someone who is trans. And so just these various ways that those identities intersect. But all of that makes it sound like an incredibly serious book, and lots of it is. But I think what's also really beautiful about this book is it is full of this warmth and this love and this humour. It's funny, it's sexy, it's so many other things. And I just think it's a real triumph of a book. It really is a way of Harry sharing his story in a way that's so beautiful and powerful, but equally is just a delight to read. I just sort of wolfed this book down. I really loved it, and I really urge you, if you get the chance, to check it out as well. I think it's just a real achievement and something so beautiful. Next up, we have Love, Leda by Mark Hyatt, and this is a book that was written in the 60s and has sort of had this revival here now. It's set around Soho in London, which is an area where for many times was sort of kind of still to this day really has this sort of seedy underbelly, and was also the area where lots of people who were excluded from life in various other ways ended up. So not only sort of big sort of theatre quarter and artistic quarter, but also a big area where lots of LGBTQ plus people lived and worked and interacted with each other. And this book I'm really excited for, because it is basically like a sort of a discovery of a real sort of real life telling of what was happening at the time, but now kind of us being able to look at it in the 2020s, I think is an incredibly exciting thing of sort of what this looked like 60 years ago, and how radical this book would have been for that time as well. Next up, I'm really excited to read Summer Fun by Jeanne Thornton, and this is sort of, it seems like basically like a sort of 1960s sort of band book. As in about bands, not as in this book has been banned, but well, I don't think it has. But it sort of also sort of features this sort of apparently sort of fairly unconventional structure. It sort of has various trans characters and sort of really focuses in on trans experiences. And so I'm really excited for this as a sort of dreamy book written by a trans woman that really investigates some of those things as well. So I'm, like I was saying earlier, I'm really excited to see where we're really going as well with LGBTQ plus literature, where often we're getting these brand new stories being told, often by people who haven't necessarily been telling them before, at least haven't been sort of published in a big way telling them. And so this is really exciting, I think, to sort of see this sort of summery, dreamy book, but with this very sort of weird experimental thing, and also just, featuring a set of characters who can sort of shed some interesting insights into sort of trans lives as well. On a very similar note, Never Was by Gareth Gavin, which very similarly explores trans identities here, a bit more sort of trans-masculine identities, in a kind of experimental, weird and wonderful way, as in sort of the text occasionally breaks up bits of the page. Let's find a good example of that. There are some bits, where it's sort of the text itself is sort of a bit broken, it becomes footnotes, there's a picture in here, lots of things happening in this book. So I'm really excited for something just a bit out there and experimental. It's from Cypher Press, who are always good for and sort of trustable for weird and wonderful queer books. And so I'm really, really excited for this as well, just to kind of get really stuck in and read a bit more about something like this. I feel like it might break my brain a little bit, but yeah, that's a good thing. I'm really, really excited to read this. And last but not least, Pageboy by Elliott Page. So Elliott Page sort of transitioned a few years ago and sort of publicly has now sort of been talking a lot more about his identity. And it's one of those really glorious things where in so many interviews, Elliott Page just seems so happy in who he is. And this book, Pageboy, is his memoir talking about that. And I'm really, really excited to read it and to kind of get his side of things. I think he must have, I think, such an interesting perspective on all of this, particularly doing, sort of transitioning in such a public way and, under the scrutiny of the public eye. So I'm really keen to read his book as well and just learn a little bit more about everything that he has to say. And I realise this is not an exhaustive list of books that I've been talking about. I kind of got a few here, but I think there are so many books that are coming out at the moment that are just really exploring queer identities in so many ways, really pushing the boundaries of fiction in general and I think and non-fiction. And so I'm just really excited to see what comes next. Also, like I mentioned, I've barely scratched the surface with this. If you've got any other really good recommendations for books either about to come out or that have recently come out, I'd really love to hear them. So please pop those in the comments. But if not, either way, I've been Bob the Bookerer talking about some books for Pride Month, which has just gone. I'm a little late. I was away, in fairness to myself. But also, yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts and take care and speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.